Our daily lives are filled with choices, opportunity to do what is good and right, or instead focus on fleeting pleasures. Today, join Pastor Lemming for another message in his series on finding the good life.
The future is a million little choices. A little extra work or a little extra play. Reconcile or let the sun go down on your anger. Get up or push the snooze button again. Your future is a million little choices, and it starts today.
If you'll find your place in your Bible with me at the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 7. We're going to look at one verse out of chapter 6, and then we'll move into chapter 7. If you're just joining us today, we are in a study of the book of Ecclesiastes. We're not going to read every verse of Ecclesiastes. There's a number of times when Solomon repeats what he's teaching. He observes, and then he makes an observation, or an application, I should say, of what he has observed, and it repeats itself, comes at it from a number of different angles. And so we'll be looking at this book for at least another 3 or 4 weeks. But today we are in chapter 7 specifically. And I want you to follow along with me, beginning, if you will, in verse 12. And I'm going to read down, if you'll follow with me, through verse 14 of chapter 7, chapter 6, verse 12. For who knows what is good for man in life, all the days of his vain life which he passes like a shadow? Who can tell a man what will happen after him under the sun? A good name is better than precious ointment, in the day of death than the day of one's birth. Better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for that is the end of all men, and the living will take it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by a sad countenance the heart is made better. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. For like the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This also is vanity. Surely oppression destroys a wise man's reason, and a bribe debases the heart. The end of a thing is better than its beginning. The patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Do not hasten in your spirit to be angry, for anger rests in the bosom of fools. Do not say, why were the former days better than these? For you do not inquire wisely concerning this. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, and profitable to those who see the sun. For wisdom is a defense, as money is a defense. But the excellence of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to those who have it. Consider the work of God, for who can make straight what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity, be joyful, but in the day of adversity, consider surely God has appointed the one as well as the other, so that man can find out nothing that will come after him. Interesting verses, wouldn't you say? Solomon is writing for us a journal. He is giving to us his thoughts as he is observing life. He's trying to find meaning and purpose. He's trying to find a reason to go on living this life. And as he looks at life purely in an under-the-sun perspective, just what man can see and what man can observe. He doesn't have at this moment a vertical perspective. He can't see it from God's point of view. He's looking at it from man's point of view. He goes through and he writes down his observations, and he writes down the applications. Now, what's interesting as we continue in this study today is that when you get to chapter 7, there's a turn that Solomon makes. And in making this turn, he goes from a lot of the observations to begin giving us proverbs. Those verses that we read, especially in chapter 7, are proverbs. If you don't know what a proverb is, it's a short or a pithy statement that's made concerning some aspect of life, some truth or some insight about life. We know that Solomon spoke 3,000 plus proverbs. And some of the proverbs that Solomon spoke are here in this 7th chapter. And today, rather than having one theme that sort of everything else wraps itself around, we're going to be looking at several different things as we talk through these different proverbs, and then we come to the end and we focus on one particular proverb that we didn't even read just yet. At the end of chapter 6 and verse 12, he basically is saying, let me tell you about life. Nobody knows what's coming next. Nobody knows whether tomorrow will have hardship or whether it'll be a day of pleasantries. Nobody knows what's going on except God. God is the only one who knows the future. But as he moves out of chapter 6 into verse 7, he says, while we might not know what the future holds, I can tell you this. There are some things that are better than others when it comes to the choices that we make in life. Now, the reality is we make choices, lots of choices, every single day of our lives, right? And the more good choices we make, the more good outcomes we have. The more bad choices we make, the more bad outcomes we have. And so when it comes to the matter of making choices, we want somebody to inform us, give us some instruction about the choice we have to make. We want somebody to tell us their experience. You go online when you're looking for somebody to do some kind of work, or you're about to buy some kind of product, and what do? You look at people's experiences. You look how they graded that particular company or that particular product. You want to know, is it something that I should invest in? Is it something that I should undertake? You want to have somebody who's been there and done that to give you some advice, some counsel as you're making these major decisions. Understand, you made dozens of decisions this morning. They're basically inconsequential. I mean, decisions like, what am I going to wear today? And what time am I going to get up? And what time am I going to get to the service? And, where am I going to sit in the service? You made a lot of decisions that in some ways are inconsequential. You can sit anywhere. You could wear different things. It wouldn't make a whole lot of difference. But there are a lot of decisions in life that make a major difference, right? A lot of decisions in life that determine what's going to come of your life down the road. There are a lot of decisions that affect your eternity. And so you want advice, you want insight, you want understanding, you want knowledge, you want wisdom, you want experience, you want people to speak those things to you so that you can make the best decisions. And that's what Solomon is doing in his Proverbs. He's saying there's a lot of decisions you got to make. You don't know what tomorrow holds. You can't be certain what's going to be on tomorrow. But I can tell you that there are some things that are better than others for you to do in the process. Now, I'll just tell you up front, you're probably not going to like some of the advice that he gives. But I hope that you'll at least stop and consider what he has to say, because in doing so, you will gain wisdom today by listening to the words of Solomon in these Proverbs. He begins in chapter 7 by telling you something that is better. By the way, the word better is used 13 times. The Hebrew word translated better is used 13 times in the 7th chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes. 7 of those times it's translated as the word better. Sometimes it's translated as good or pleasing. It's translated as joyful one time in the 7th chapter. 13 times he's going to tell you some things that are better than other choices that you might be facing that you want to stop and you want to think about. What's the first one? First Proverbs in chapter 7, verse 1. A good name is better than precious ointment. I think you'd agree with me on that, wouldn't you? He says it in Proverbs 22, verse 1 in a little different way, but he says the same thing. A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches. What does he mean by a good name? He's talking about a good reputation, that you are respected by other people. Sometimes I hear people say, I don't care what anybody else thinks of me. Well, you might not be able to control what everybody else thinks about you, but every one of us, at least as believers in Jesus, should care what other people think about us. That's our testimony. That's our reputation. And a good name is better than precious ointment. I mean, you put on that beautiful smelling perfume or that cologne that you put on in the morning so that you can smell pleasant as you go through the day. But better than the smell of that perfume or that ointment is the name that goes with you, the reputation that you carry, the way you're known by other people. In the New Testament, when it comes to choosing leaders in the church, at the heart of leadership isn't how good you can preach a sermon or how good you can sing a solo or how well you can play an instrument. At the heart of leadership in the local church is the aspect of your character and being known in a community as somebody who is respectable. They might not like you for all of the positions that you take, but they respect you for your disposition and the way you carry yourself in that community. When I arrived here back in December of 1982, we were a very small congregation of people, and I'll never forget a couple of men coming to me, men that I had learned to trust over those weeks as I was just getting into the ministry here. And they said to me, "Pastor, there's a man in the church that if he comes to you, we want you to know that no matter what he tells you, don't believe him." Totally shocked me. I'd never had anybody say anything like that before. But they said, he'll come and he'll volunteer, but he'll never show up. He'll tell you that he's going to purchase something that we're in need of, but he'll never buy it. And they went on through this list of things, and I just couldn't, in my mind, I couldn't rationalize. How could it be that somebody could say those kind of things and try to present themselves in one way and be somebody totally different? And yet over the months that followed, I found it to be exactly the truth. On more than one occasion, he volunteered to do some things, but he never showed up to do them. On more than one occasion, he offered to help in some areas, financially to help in some areas, but he never came through to help in those areas. And finally, after a number of months, probably more than a year, 16, 18 months, telling me things that he was going to do and wasn't going to do. His reputation was that he was a liar, that he misrepresented himself, that he wanted to sound impressive, but he never followed through on anything. Finally, I just, one day when he told me something, I said, "Why do you keep telling me things that you don't do?" I didn't say it quite that way. "Why do you keep telling me things that you don't do?" And he backed up and he hem-hawed around, and it wasn't a week or two or three, and he wasn't there anymore. I wasn't happy about that. I'd rather him have changed his character. I'd rather him changed his conduct. But the reality is all of us should care what other people think about us. We might not be able to control what everybody else thinks about us, but we should care what other people think about us because that's our testimony. That's our reputation. And to have a good name matters because even if people don't like where you stand, they at least appreciate the disposition, the manner in which you carry yourself. But it's the second half of this proverb that's really hard for a lot of people. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. Oh, my goodness. Solomon must have been a real killjoy. I mean, everybody wanted to run around life with Solomon, don't you think? The day of death is better than the day of one's birth. But I want you to stop and think of it the way Solomon was thinking about it. The day of birth, you're just entering into the vale of tears that you have to experience when you're going through life. But the day of death, the vale of tears has ended. You no longer have to see the injustices. You no longer have to experience the pain. You no longer have to go through the tears that are experienced in living out life. And all of us know a newborn baby, there isn't anything, to me at least, more beautiful than a newborn baby. Somebody said, I've seen some babies that aren't pretty. In all of my years, I have never seen a newborn baby who wasn't beautiful, innocent and beautiful. But can I tell you something? We all know that ahead in the lives of those newborns, there are trials and tribulations and troubles they'll have to deal with. They'll have to go through those things. But at the other end of life, you finished. You have no more of those things you have to face. And as Solomon is thinking about the things that he's looking at and he's observing in life, he's saying the day of your death is better than the day of your birth, because the day of your death, all of your troubles are over. The day of your birth, they're just beginning. I was thinking about this proverb related to my own parents. My daddy went to heaven 12 years ago at 87. My mother went about 2.5 years ago at 96. And I would call him on the phone, or when I was visiting with him, there were numerous conversations that we had about things that bothered them. They were concerned about the lack of patriotism in our country. They were concerned about the way churches were moving away from the truth of God, moving away from the things of God. They were concerned about the disrespect that was being shown from one man to another, from one woman to another. They were concerned about these things, and on many occasions, we had conversations about those things. They were bothered by the things they were seeing and they were experiencing that they didn't experience earlier in their lives. My daddy and mother came out of those Depression years. They were a part of that builder generation. My daddy served in the Army Air Corps. Before it became the Army Air Force, he was 3 years stationed overseas away from my mother. And when he came back, he, like all of those other of that generation, were determined to build something better for their children. And they did, didn't they? They did, didn't they? And now they're looking at things and they're seeing things devolve, things that are declining, and they're disturbed by it. And I thought, recently, as I was thinking about this message today, I'm so thankful that my mother and daddy are not here to have to experience COVID, not to have to experience the political arena that we have seen in recent years, not to have to experience some of the things in this life, because death, in this case, is better than birth. That's what he's saying. He's not saying that you ought to wish to die, but he's telling you that when you come to the end of life, all of those troubles are over. And for those of us who are believers in Jesus Christ, they are really over, aren't they? Because to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. The Apostle Paul said, for me to live is Christ, and to die is what? It's gain. And so you can say in this proverb what Solomon was saying: a good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth, because in death you're released from all the struggles of this life. And yet those who are coming into this world, we wish them the very best and we pray for them to experience the very best, but we also know that there are struggles that happen in everybody's life, and they have yet to face those things. Then he moves along. In verse 2 down to verse 4, he continues these proverbs. He says, better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting, for that is the end of all men, and the living will take it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by a sad countenance the heart is made better. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning. That's the second time he's used that phrase. He used it in verse 2. He uses it again in verse 4, the house of mourning. But the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. Again, somebody says, wow, I don't think I want to hang out with Solomon very much. He says he'd rather go to the funeral home than he had to the local parties that are going on around. But again, you have to stop and you have to remember what Solomon is saying and try to understand the wisdom that he's imparting. He wants you to understand that life has to be lived in view of the fact that all of us are going to die. But a lot of people don't live that way. They live as if this life is all there is, and they live as if they have all the time they want to live this life. And that's just not the reality, is it? That's just not the reality. This matter of laughter and feasting and going to the house of mirth, going to the comedy clubs and sitting in front of the television, listening to the comedy channel and just laughing and playing through life. If you don't stop and you don't remember, you only get so much time in this world. And you don't want to waste that time that you've been given. And please understand, Solomon is not a killjoy. As a matter of fact, it's Solomon who says in the book of Proverbs that laughter is good. You know what the next words are? Like a medicine. Look in your Bible here just a few pages over, and I'll point it out to you again. Chapter 8, verse 15. Notice what he says. Chapter 8, verse 15. So I commended enjoyment because a man has nothing better under the sun than to eat, drink, and be merry, for this will remain with him in his labor all the days of his life, which God gives to him. Look at chapter 9, verse 7. He says, go eat your bread with joy, drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already accepted your works. Let your garments always be white. Let your head lack no oil. Live joyfully with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life, which he has given you under the sun all the days of the vanity, for that is your portion in life. 7 times in the book of Solomon, he says, enjoy your life, enjoy your life, enjoy your life. He says it over and over again, enjoy your life. He's not trying to be a killjoy. But what he does want you to do is learn that every day is a gift from God. We need to learn to seize the days that God has given to us and to live those days to the fullest and not in foolishness. Live those days to the fullest and not in foolishness. And there's something about going to the house of mourning that becomes the schoolhouse of learning that helps you to quickly prioritize your life as to what is really most important. You know that to be true? You know, you've heard of the wedding preacher. I think I'm the funeral preacher. I think over the years of my ministry, I have to have done as many funerals as any preacher in this community, if not more than any preacher in this community. And you add to that the 3 or 4 times more that I've attended people's funerals that I have attended. I've been to the funeral home over and over again. I've stood with people. I've sat there in the room with people in the last moments of their lives. Maybe they were just a few days out from passing. Maybe they were just a few hours out from passing. And some of them couldn't communicate, but those that could communicate, I have never yet to this day, ever once, ever heard anybody in those last moments of their lives, the last days of their lives, ever say, I wish I'd made another business call. I wish I'd spent another day at the office. I wish I'd closed another deal. I wish I'd taken that business trip around the world to make that deal on the other side of the world. I have never once ever heard anybody ever say that. But I have heard them say, I wish I had more time with my family. I wish I had more time with my husband or my wife. I wish I had more time to serve God. I wish I didn't have to leave so early and leave my family behind. I wish we could all go to heaven together and we could all be at the same time in the presence of the Savior. Because death, the house of mourning, is the schoolhouse of learning that quickly prioritizes what is most important in life. Is there a place for laughter? Is there a place for a house of mirth? Is there a place for the house of feasting? Absolutely. But you better stop and remember that God's only given you so many days, and you better seize the days that God has given to you. I did a terrible thing when I was a young minister. We didn't have anybody to leave our young children with when we had funerals. So we took them with us to the visitations, and we took them with us to many of the funerals, not all of them, but to many of the funerals. And on one occasion, I got there, as I always do, early before the family got there, and I took my 2 children, elementary age. Mary's laughing now, but she took my 2 elementary age children. I said, let's go back into the back recesses of the funeral home. Daddy, won't there be a body back there? I don't know. But we'll deal with it when we get there. Now, I did know. I knew that there wouldn't likely be anybody back there. People sometimes say, Pastor, should my children go to funerals? A lot of that depends on you as a parent and on the age and maturity of your child. But you understand, children need to understand that life doesn't go on forever. Children need closure in death as well. And for some children, it is the right thing to do to let them go and be a part of and see what's going on. They need to understand that it's not all about laughter. It's not all about playing, that you only get so many years. And you don't waste the years that God has given you. That's what Solomon is saying. That's why he wants you to go to the house of mourning, why he wants you to mourn. He wants you to stop and think about so that you invest yourself in the best things in the course of this life. And then he moves to another series of Proverbs in verses 5 to 7. He says, it's better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. For like the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This also is vanity. He says it's better. It's better to have a good name. It's better the day of your death than the day of your birth, because you're facing at birth all of the trials and tribulations. At death, they've ended. It's better to go to the house of mourning because you prioritize your life and you see what's most important. It's better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. You ever had anybody sing your praises and then stab you in the back a little bit later? Look you in the face and tell you all the nice things, buttering you up, and then turn around and tell somebody else something horrible that's not even true about you? It's better to hear the rebuke of the wise. We don't like the rebuke of the wise, do we? We don't like the word rebuke. We don't like the word correction. I don't like it. Do you like it? In all of my years, I've never enjoyed when somebody corrected me or somebody rebuked me in some way. I never enjoyed it. It wasn't like I signed up on the list. This is my day. This is my time. Like a doctor's appointment. This is my day and this is my time. This is the opportunity for me to be rebuked today. But when it's somebody who's wise, when it's somebody who knows God and knows His Word, and they come to you and they tell you the truth, even though the truth hurts, it's far better than the kisses of an enemy. It's far better to hear the words of rebuke than to have the kisses of an enemy. It's more important than to have the song of the fools singing to you. You see what he says about the song of the fools? It's like the crackling of thorns under a pot. It's like you take a bunch of brush and you throw it into the fire. And what does it do? It makes a lot of noise. It flares up really quickly and then it's gone.
Thanks for joining us today, and we hope you'll return next week to hear the second part of this message. If you would like more information about today's message or Lewis Memorial Baptist Church, feel free to contact us. We'd love to hear how this ministry is helping you in your daily walk.